Franklin Pierce was our 14th president, and many feel he was one of the worst. In fairness, he didn't divide the North and the South, and I question whether there was a fixable solution without a civil war to end the problem of slavery. Franklin felt that the problem with slavery was too divisive of an issue. He wanted to maintain the Union at any cost. To him, it was just all about union, union, union. His enforcement of the Fugitive Slave Act did not help unite anybody. Unfortunately, his home life was also quite disturbing. All of his 3 children died early. His wife was depressed. He was a heavy drinker and would end up dying of cirrhosis. Pierce was born on November 23rd, 1804, in Hillsborough, New Hampshire. He was born in a log cabin on his father's 50-acre farm. His father was a farmer and was very active in state politics. Pierce initially disliked school, but he would buckle up and graduate from Bowdoin College in 1824, fifth in his class, although there were only 14 students. He studied law in Northampton Law School and read law for almost 2 years, and in 1827 he was admitted to the New Hampshire bar. At the same time, his father was elected as the governor of New Hampshire. Although his father would not be reelected, he would run again and get elected again. Franklin was elected as a Democrat to the New Hampshire House of Representatives, and in 1831 he was elected as its Speaker. He was also a member of the state militia until 1847. He rose to the rank of colonel but became brigadier general in the Army during the Mexican-American War, where he was under the command of Winfield Scott, and participated in the battles of Veracruz and Mexico City. In 1832, he was elected to the House of Representatives. He would marry Jane Means Appleton in 1834, and the two could not be more different. He was a drinker, and she was pro-temperance. She was shy, he was outgoing. She hated Washington and politics, he was a political animal. They had 3 children, all of whom would die. Frank Jr. died in infancy, Frank Robert died at the age of 4, and Benjamin died in a train wreck at the age of 11. In the House, he was consistently trying to defeat the abolitionists, not because he supported slavery. He saw it as a social and a political evil, but he saw how it was dividing the Union. In 1837, he was elected to the Senate at 32 years of age. He was one of the youngest members at that time. In the Senate, he opposed the ending of slavery in Washington, D.C. He saw it as a stepping stone to emancipation, which would ensure the South would succeed. He resigned from the Senate for numerous reasons. At the time, New Hampshire wanted only one 6-year term for their senators, so he wasn't going to be reelected. In addition, his father, sister, brother, and wife were all sick. He returned to New Hampshire to continue with his law practice. His law practice was flourishing, and he was gaining quite a reputation. On many occasions, he would even represent poor people for free. Pierce was named chairman of the New Hampshire Democratic Committee. Pierce had one goal: party unity. But when war was declared with Mexico in 1846, Pierce volunteered. At the Battle of Contreras, his horse got spooked and he hit the saddle groin first. The horse then tripped and fell, injuring Pierce's knee. Some thought Pierce had fainted, and there were rumors that he was a coward. The next day, due to his knee, he couldn't keep up with the troops, so more rumors started about his cowardice. He would pass out on the field again due to his knee and the pain. He didn't participate in the capture of Mexico City, but his regiment was held back anyway. But during that occupation, he would spend much of his time sick because now he was always getting diarrhea. Once again, rumors of cowardice would grow. They would plague him pretty much for the rest of his political career. Ulysses S. Grant, who observed him during the Mexican War, insisted in his memoirs that he was not a coward and handled himself perfectly properly. He returned to New Hampshire, where the slavery issue was growing strong. In the 1848 election, when Lewis Cass was chosen as the Democratic candidate for president, some party members broke with the party and formed the Free Soil Party, backing former President Van Buren, while the Whigs supported Zachary Taylor. Pierce spent the next few years with his law practice and remained heavily involved in the politics in New Hampshire. He continued to maintain his stance of unity of the country over everything else. In the election of 1852, most Democratic Party leaders felt there was no one person that had enough support to win a nomination to be the Democratic presidential candidate. They finally chose a compromise candidate, but he died. So Pierce's allies thought they could move his name into the ring. There were many candidates going for the presidential nomination. There was Macy from New York, Buchanan from Pennsylvania, Houston from Texas, Cass, Douglas, Benton from Missouri. Just there were several names out there. And Pierce had been out of office for almost a decade. They weren't sure if he had high enough national profile, national recognition, as some of the other candidates did. But somehow, out of the blue, on the 48th ballot, Pierce secured the nomination. And they also chose William R. King, a senator from Alabama, to be his vice presidential candidate. The Whigs ran General Winfield Scott, Pierce's commander in the Mexican War. And for their vice president, they picked the Secretary of the Navy, William Graham. The Free Soil Party also nominated their candidate, Hale. He was a senator. But neither party wanted to upset anybody on the slavery issue. And when they wrote their platforms, they were virtually the same. It was a boring election. It was the lowest turnout that they've had in the past several elections. The opponents of Pierce, of course, would use the rumors of his cowardice during the war. They would call him the hero of many well-fought battles because they also went into his heavy drinking. Even the Whigs didn't like their own candidate, who they referred to as abysmal. Pierce easily won the election, however, with 254 electoral votes and 50.9% of the popular votes. Scott only won 4 states and received 42 electoral votes and 44.1% of the popular vote. The Free Soil Party received no electoral votes and only got 4.9% of the popular vote. Weeks after winning the election, Pierce, his wife, and his only remaining son were traveling by train from Boston when their train car derailed, killing and almost decapitating his 11-year-old son. They were both in a state of depression, and his wife would seldom fulfill the role as First Lady. When Franklin left New Hampshire to go to Washington, his wife did not go with him. Pierce would attempt to appease every faction by giving federal positions to different parties, but this pleased no one, neither faction would see their appointments as fair. Pierce's vice president in the meantime, William King, died in April of 1853. The position would remain vacant because there was no constitutional means at that time to replace the vice president. Pierce attempted to initiate a civil service style program instead of the patronage that was being used. He wanted federal employees to be hired on merit, not on patronage. He also sent James Gadsden down to Mexico to purchase more land from the Mexicans. This would actually finalize our border with Mexico. This was done in anticipation of the area he purchased was going to be used as a railroad route. The overriding problem was the Kansas-Nebraska Act. This repealed the Slavery Compromise from the Missouri Compromise of 1820, which stopped further expansion of slavery out west. The Kansas-Nebraska Act allowed for a popular vote to decide whether it would be a slave state or not a slave state. So what happened was both sides tried to flood Kansas with people. That way their side of the issue would have the majority of votes. It would be called Bleeding Kansas, as violence erupted between the slavery and the anti-slavery factions. Pierce retained the view of union, almost any compromise to keep the nation together. And in the end, this pleased no one. And in the midterm elections, both the Democrats and the Whigs suffered huge losses. In fairness, however, the Whig Party was in decline anyway. There were such bad feelings that in the Senate, Charles Sumner was assaulted with a cane on the Senate floor by Preston Brooks. In the election of 1856, there were 4 candidates for the Democratic nomination for president: Pierce, Buchanan, Douglas, and Cass. Pierce realized he was not getting the nomination and asked his supporters to vote for Douglas. Douglas, however, would end up dropping out because he was promised support to try to get the nomination in the 1860 election. This was the only time in U.S. history that an elected president actually seeking re-election did not receive his party's nomination. Buchanan received the nomination with John C. Breckinridge, a former Kentucky representative, for vice president. After leaving the White House, Pierce and Jane spent the next few years traveling abroad. Pierce never lost interest in politics. The Democrats asked him to run again in the 1860 election, but he declined. Pierce's wife died in 1863 of tuberculosis. Pierce spent his last years farming, still remaining interested in politics and the affairs of the nation. He died on October 8, 1869, at the age of 64. At the height of his wealth, he was worth about $2 million in today's money, and had most of it upon dying. He would leave it to his friends and his relatives. Thanks for listening.